Thank you all for having me here today. I think we got some tech challenges. Hopefully that will get resolved. But I'm very honored to be here. I know that the work that you do in the field is not easy. It is an arduous task that we take on every day. And while I know that this work is not easy in what we do, from birth to college, we recognize and know that we have support in our field and with our peers. And today I'd like to talk about that support that exists for us and that support that we create that exists for our families. Because together there's something that we have that is tremendously important that we have in common, and it's the children that we work with every day. It's the children that our families raise every day in our communities. And so today we're going to explore how families play an integral part in building strong schools and how we connect with our families in meaningful ways and ensuring that our children thrive and our communities are strong. I too would like to extend some thank yous to this group, more specifically to Ardella and also to Bethany for extending the invitation for me to come to talk about the work that we're doing at the Illinois State Board of Education in partnership with CSI and beyond. I'd also like to thank the Core Content Foundational Services team who have been working with arduously for the past 2.5 years in building supports for schools and districts statewide around this critical work. Our team members include Susie Dees, Linda Oshita, Kevin McClure, Ryan Wamser, and Marcy Johnson. I'd also like to thank our superintendent for kind of setting the vision for this work, because recognizing that when we talk about equity, access, and high quality education, that it really takes all stakeholders to be engaged and be involved. And I really appreciate the tone that he has set for this work, as well as other folks such as Marcy Johnson, who shepherded this work for a tremendous amount of time, and most importantly to Assistant Superintendent Raina Hernandez, who's really kind of set the trail ablaze and ensuring that it moves forward in a robust way, and that we're really thinking about how we're taking a collaborative approach to the work. So I came into the field. Of course, you have the bio and the folders, but my journey around family engagement really started when I was a young person, when I was 6 years old. I am from Rockford area. Shout out for Rockford. And my young life, many of us were in the midst of the desegregation lawsuit, and my mother was trying to raise 3 biracial children in the Rockford area, and she was one voice of many wanting to ensure that her children had equitable access to high quality education. And it was her journey that inspired me and gave me the knowledge and knowing and the value for learning, because I could see in her how much she valued that for us and for all the children in the area. And so I knew that there was something very important about my journey and wanting to value how I value education, my path. And then also that we have to ensure that we're part of making that journey possible, not only for ourselves, but for the children in our areas. And that when we look to make schools strong, that it really takes all involved parties. And so that's kind of where my journey started and is continuing to grow. And as I've done this work with schools and districts across the state, I know that my journey is not singular in nature. It's a shared journey. It's a shared story. And we tackle very similar questions that look at what is the role of the school when there's so many issues children face that go beyond that school day. How do we engage families when we do not see in the building? How do we tackle barriers to learning and bias in education? And where are the supports to dismantle generation failure in communities? So today, I implore you to open your minds and your hearts to possibility. We're going to dig deep. We're going to work collaboratively. There's no denying what the research continues to say about when family engagement, and when families are an integral part of how we do business in schools and districts, the needle moves. The For Each and Every Child report published in partnership with the U.S. Department of Education acknowledges that family engagement helps to mitigate the effects of poverty. Families matter. It is a dual capacity approach. It's a dual generational approach. And when families are engaged and schools become strong, children learn and communities thrive. So let's begin our journey, and let's dig deep, and let's roll up our sleeves today. With that said, I'd like for us to kind of set the baseline in terms of where we start around our thinking and our perception around the work. I'm working in partnership today with Linda, Ogeto, and Susie Dees to talk about what this work looks like and what it means. On your tables, you have two types of Post-it notes. You have small Post-it notes and you have large Post-it notes. I would like for you to individually write down a few thoughts about how you define family engagement. So it's your thinking on paper around how you define family engagement. Then what I'd like you to do is, as a table, to collectively talk about where are the common pieces around your shared definitions for family engagement. Okay? Linda and Susie will come around to collect them, and then we're going to chart them on a paper to kind of look at what is the baseline for this work and how we perceive it here in this room today. So it'll take a couple minutes, and we'll do that. All right? Thank you. Okay, how are we doing in terms of time? Do you think we have a pretty fair, some solid thinking on that little Post-it? Okay, very good. So now as a table, let's have a conversation around what your thoughts are around how you define family engagement and where we can find some common ground at the table around how we define family engagement. We'll give ourselves a couple of minutes for that. Thank you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and reconvene. I see large envelopes going up to Susie and Linda. Envelopes. Papers. If you could hand those forward. Thank you so much. We're going to come back to them momentarily, but I wanted us to really think about how we're thinking about this. So hopefully when we walk away at the end of the day, we'll have some common knowledge and some common understanding around the work. And I know that you guys, some of you have been involved with this work for a long time, and you've been a part of some conversations around family engagement last week, so wanting to kind of make sure that we come back and triangulate our understanding about how this work looks like and how it moves forward. So with that said, let's talk about our targets for today. Today we'd like to talk about and look at how we can gain a better understanding around the evidence-based and high-impact efforts around family engagement, to understand the deliberate processes needed to engage families in meaningful ways, to be able to access resources and tools, or I better would call it, as my colleague I learned from the Chicago area says, implementation strategies, to develop and expand school-family partnerships, and to be able to share the high-impact strategies and the deliberate processes with our colleagues here today in this room, but most importantly when we go back to our respective schools and districts. Okay, so those are our targets for today. And so we've had the opportunity to individually and collectively talk about what this work means to us more specifically. I always find it's really helpful for us also to look at the work that's happening in a meaningful way. What does high quality look like? And so one of the things that I'd like to show for you, just a snippet of some of the work that's happening in another state, but really thinking about how we take a systemic approach around family engagement. This is a short video. It's coming from the Children's Institute. This work highlights what's happening in Idaho. So let's take a minute to look at this.
In Oregon, we're just not meeting the benchmarks of having kids graduate and having kids being healthy. There's something that's missing, and to me, the critical component is the family. The parents are there. They want to support their kids to be successful. I mean, The missing link is how do they successfully connect to the school?
Through its Early Works initiative in Southern Oregon, the Children's Institute, along with Ford Family Foundation, Yoncalla Elementary School, and other community partners, is leveraging public resources in this town of just 1,000 people to provide early learning opportunities for at-risk young children and families who live here. A critical part of this initiative is the use of research-backed strategies to engage these families before their children reach kindergarten.
Here, everything is so far away. I think that's the hardest part really, is doctors and mental health and dentists and the important things, grocery stores. Sometimes you don't want to go like up to somebody's house, you see they have kids, you don't just want to walk up to their house and say, hey, I see you have kids the age of my kids. You want to play? You want to hang out? You want to talk? You want to visit? Have coffee? That's a hard bubble to break sometimes.
Amanda Brown has a lot to juggle by herself. Her husband is a long-haul truck driver who works the graveyard shift. The family makes just enough that they don't qualify for much assistance and food stamps, but not enough to pay all the bills. Her children have medical issues as well as behavioral and mental health complications. As part of the Early Works initiative, Yoncalla Elementary has established the Family Room at the school, a place where parents of young children can connect to resources and meet other parents. Brown takes her youngest daughter, Kaylin, there every week. She says spending time there helps her feel like her struggles are normal.
It's the kids' school. It's not somewhere that's somebody else's space. It makes it easier for you to talk to the other parents and get acquainted and then get comfortable where you can spend time together.
The Family Room, says Amanda, gives her both more resources and more confidence as a parent. Research has shown that when parents are supported through this kind of community engagement, their kids are more prepared for school and more likely to graduate. It's families like the Browns that demonstrate a fundamental tenet of the initiative. When schools and communities invest in parent engagement, kids benefit.
You know, the facts are telling you this is not going to work. Families are too overwhelmed. All of the conditions for potential failure are there. The great thing is that you see every day how it is possible.
This school is my life. I'm all the time here.
Lucia Sanchez is also involved with the Early Works initiative at a second Early Works location, Earl Boyles Elementary in Southeast Portland. Through this initiative, she's enrolled her son in the preschool program and volunteers in his classroom. She's working on a job skills internship through the school's lending library. At 25, Sanchez is a single mom with 5 children.
I get a really, really tight budget. Really, really tight budget. There's these months that we just struggle a lot. Well, I intend not to show it, but they can tell. Kids can tell. I try to hide it, but they can't.
Without stable housing, Sanchez and her kids bounce from her mom's house to her sister's house. Earl Boyles Elementary, she says, has become the most stable part of her family's life, and it's helped improve her parenting.
My kids are a little bit behind on math, so what I'm pushing them in school is to count and to multiply it. When we're cooking, it's either get me 2 eggs and multiply it by 5.
That's the great thing of being in a school, especially like Earl Boyles, that every day you see families, bringing their kids to school, volunteering in the classroom, talking with their kids about being successful, about their goals.
Together with our partners, the Children's Institute is sharing what we've learned through the Early Works initiative in these 2 schools to create a mind shift about family engagement in education across the state.
We've had so many districts, legislators, foundations, leaders locally, statewide, nationally visit Earl Boyles, and one of the most memorable pieces of those visits have been when they've heard from parents about their transformation from seeing themselves as, oh, I'm just a parent, to seeing themselves as, I'm a parent and a leader and an educator.
With the Early Works Initiative, the Children's Institute is helping to educate leaders and to create policy that will make it possible for families all over Oregon to feel as engaged and empowered as Lucia Sanchez and Amanda Brown.
I don't know another school that would welcome the 2 and 3-year-olds into the school the way they do here. They want the younger kids as comfortable with that school as they can be on the first day of kindergarten. When parents put forth the effort and the school puts forth the effort to include everybody, that the kids know that the teachers and their parents just want their success.
What the Children's Institute wants to do is take what we've learned at our early work sites and show people how it can change lives for kids and families. What we are trying to do at a statewide level is create a mind shift to engage families earlier and partner with them in their children's education. We believe it'll fundamentally change the equation for kids in the state of Oregon.
I just think this is such a powerful video. That's my opinion. But I'd love to hear just a little bit from your thoughts, from you all. If someone wouldn't mind standing, just to kind of reflect upon what did you see in this video? Primarily just that. What did you see happening in this video and this work in Oregon? Do we have any brave souls this morning? What did you see? Yes. Can you stand up, please?
I just was saying I love the idea of a family room, and we're moving to where I'll be in the building next year is all pre-K and kindergarten. So I'm just thinking that would be something that would probably be really useful to have something along those lines.
All right. Thank you, Alice. Alice, in which district are you in?
Granite City.
Granite City.
The part where parents get connected to other parents and the children have those connections with other children. They're not isolated anymore.
Yes, that's critical because when we become parents, it can be a very isolating journey for us. Thank you, Virginia. Which district are you in?
Rock Island.
Rock Island.
I saw walls breaking down. I saw smiles and people looking at each other and communicating and having a good time.
Yes, so people, parents, teachers, school leaders coming together with a common and shared vision. Absolutely, that's so critical. Rancho City.
I see the doors open to parents, doors in buildings. We are so afraid of crime. We are so afraid of what happens inside buildings and district schools. And we have closed the doors to parents. And this program opens those doors and allows parents to come in and work with children directly. But I think I don't know, in our district, we have security guards at all the schools. And there's a long procedure to come in and volunteer. And that's closing doors to parents.
Thank you, Eva. Eva, which district are you in? District 89. Thank you all. This is powerful. I mean, I think some of the things that you've shared, about what you've seen in this video are some of the things that are really paramount around the work, building relationships, how we cultivate and create those peer-to-peer connections with parents more specifically, how we break down the barriers between parents and teachers, how we create that welcome environment and build that relational trust, and recognizing that we really do need to take that systemic approach, not only just the work that needs to happen within our families, but also the reflective work that we need to do within ourselves and our buildings, etc. So thank you all for sharing. So let's talk a little bit about the why. And I'm going to just briefly go over that because I know that the why is something that has been talked about and shared in a number of ways in a number of venues, and I know that was also shared with you all last week. But once again, there's overwhelming research that says when families are engaged, children thrive. More specifically, I'm referencing Beyond the Bake Sale book. How many of you are familiar with the Beyond the Bake Sale book by Karen Mapp and Emma Henderson? What a phenomenal book that is. I call that book the Bible around family engagement. It's one of the key tools, implementation strategies. I'm going to keep using that word. It's one of those key implementation strategies that's accessible. It's a really quick, easy, navigable read for folks to really look at what this work looks like on the ground. There's templates, there's surveys, but it's a really useful tool. And it was put together by a number of researchers, those including Ann Henderson and Karen Mapp, who've really been some of the earlier pioneers around the research and the impact that family engagement has on school improvement and outcomes for children. But one of the things that they've said in their research is that regardless of sociodynamic backgrounds of families, that at the end of the day, when parents are involved in students' lives, children thrive. More specifically, what's important to note is that children have a greater ability to earn higher grades and test scores. They're enrolled in higher level programs. They attend school regularly. They show improved behavior, and they develop better social skills. That is something that we cannot deny in terms of the impact that families have in our children's lives. This report came out of the New Wave of Evidence. Is anyone familiar with that report? By show of hands, very good. The New Wave of Evidence. So let's also look at another nugget of research, and this was done in about, what's the year that this was done? 2010, out of the University of Chicago School Consortium, with the work that was done with Alan Bright and Ellen Allensworth and a number of other team folks on their research panel. But this was a longitudinal study that was done in the Chicago area looking at 400 schools around what are those pieces that make schools strong. And that report, their report came out of what was called Organizing Schools for Improvement. From that report came what we now know today as the 5 essentials. How many of you, by show of hands, are familiar with the 5 essentials? That's just many hands. Very good. Excellent. And of course, we see the 5, we know and are aware of the 5 essentials survey. But what was really interesting to note from that report is that when schools are able to show strength in these 5 areas, that they're more likely to improve student learning tenfold than schools who are weak in those 5 essential areas. Do we see something that's really important as one of those 5 essential areas that really correlate to today's topic? It's families. Having involved families is an essential component of building strong schools. One of the things that's interesting to note is that this is paramount because we know that across the state, our schools and districts take the survey. So this is huge because we now know that there's a tremendous amount of data that we can look at and pull from as we think about the strategic work that we need to take around ensuring that we're building strong schools. I love this because within the survey that is given or that was given out, it's not only information that we're getting specifically from school leaders, we're getting it from teachers, and we're also getting it from families. So there's a real key opportunity to bring that data together, to triangulate that, to look at how these multiple perspectives come together to really help inform the trajectory of the work that we need to move the needle around outcomes for children. The last nugget of research, so we've looked at how this impacts students, we've looked at how this impacts schools, but it also impacts communities. And this report that I'm referencing comes from the Mott Compendium. How many of you have after-school programs in your schools or districts? Very good. Okay, smattering of hands, very good. But this came from the Compendium for Expanded Learning Time. This is sponsored by the Mott Foundation. And this report is highlighted there, but it comes out of from Terry Peterson in 2013, noting that when communities, when we have families involved, when we have a heightened sense of civic engagement, that good things happen. And more notably is that there's a greater sense of ownership, There's a greater sense of shared responsibility, and there's a greater level of accountability for results and supports that sustain change. We know there's a lot of change that happens frequently in our communities. And so when we're able to come to a place where we can create centers for an empowered and shared work, then we know that this work can stand on its own two legs in a more sustainable way. No matter how many principals or superintendents come and go, that when we have some sustainable roots around the work that happens within our families and our communities, it moves forward. Oftentimes, I think I was sitting in a conversation yesterday that said, we know that there's a lot of transition that happens in our school buildings, in our districts, et cetera. But one of the things that we know that doesn't change as much are the families who stay in that community. And I thought that was just a really powerful point to bring forward. So we looked at the research, three compelling reasons on why this work is so important, but then we also know that we have to do it. It's required. Within ESSA, family engagement is an integral part of many of the titles within ESSA. I'm very excited for ESSA because one of the things that we see changing within ESSA is the language, and I'll talk about that later. But how many of you can remember how family engagement was described in ESSA? What was that? What were those two key words that we connected with around family engagement within ESSA? There's parent involvement, right? So there's been a shift in terms around the thinking around how we engage families. We're saying families, and we're saying engagement. We're no longer saying parent involvement. So what does that mean, and what does that look like? And what's also interesting to note within ESSA is that recognizing that family engagement is a touch point not just in schools to receive Title I funding, but also within Title II, Title III, Title IV, IDEA, and there's a couple more extended parts within ESSA under Title IV and some other parts that really speak about this idea that families really have to be partners in how learning happens. Let's look a little bit more about that in this slide in particular. One of the things that we can note is that parents are mentioned over 300 times in ESSA, more specifically, and we cannot deny the role that families play in children's lives across the board. ESSA is the newest version of what we now know as the earliest versions of how education is publicly funded. Back in when that work first came forward, a lot of the work was centralized, and we're really thinking about how parents play that critical role. And as it's become a little bit more compartmentalized, we've kind of lost the role of families in that picture. And I feel like with ESSA, it's kind of coming back together in a way. So let's kind of talk about and look at that transition from the evolution from parent involvement to family engagement. So we're asking us to think about that shift from parent involvement to family engagement. And it's often said that parent involvement refers to parent participation in the systems and activities and ways that support them as the primary educators, nurturers, and advocates for individual children and for all children enrolled in the school district. Oftentimes we see parent involvement referring to opportunities for parents' participation in a variety of program activities that support child and adult development. When we think about family engagement, first of all, we're looking at that shift around recognizing the role and the multitude of responsibilities that not just parents play in children's lives, but really that caring adult. So we recognize that it's not just the parent, it's the grandparent, it's the aunt, it's that neighbor, it's that sister or brother. It's really that caring adult that we also need to be cognizant of how that adult plays or impacts that child's life. So it's family. And let's look at engagement. So shifting from the activity-based perspective, but really looking at having ongoing and developing goal-directed relationships between staff and families that are mutual, culturally responsive, and support what is best for children and families both individually and collectively. Staff and families share responsibility for learning and the development of children, the progress towards outcomes for children and families, and for parent involvement in the program. It's a higher construct when we think about that shift from parent involvement to family engagement. So what does that look like in real terms? And I think this slide is just great because it really helps to kind of pull that apart, right? So when we talk about parent involvement to family engagement, we're really looking at shifting from the individual parents or teacher's job to a shared responsibility. We're looking at moving from random acts to a systemic approach that begins from cradle to career. We're looking at moving from just having a series of events to results driven and sustainable activities. We're building intentionality within the things that we're doing. We're not just saying we're going to have a parent night for the sake of parent night. We're saying we're going to have a series of educational opportunities that may be co-created with families and teachers on an ongoing basis to really drive the needle around a specific measure that we want to impact within our schools and districts. We're moving from add-on services to purposeful connections to learning. We're moving from compliance to the focus on improvement and accountability as well as innovation. From limited data to really building out transparent data systems. And from going from a deficit adversarial approach to a strengths-based and collaborative approach where we're honoring and recognizing that we all have something to bring to the table and how we can really maximize that opportunity in a meaningful way. So, with that said, I love this slide just because it really kind of brings home that idea, that shift, how we're moving the needle in the thinking, not just thinking about what can we do to ensure that we're meeting the regs on Title I, or we're in compliance with the term we have our policy, or we have our compact, or we have our advisory committee, but really thinking about what is that work doing to move the needle of where we need to go with our schools and with our children, okay? We're moving from compliance, which is the floor, to the ceiling. That is guided by research, the evidence-based practice, and what makes contextual sense for your community, your school, and your district. So let's come back to the exercise that we did this morning. So what is it? What is family engagement? What did you guys say? And I'm going to call on Linda and Susie to kind of share with us what we said in this room about how we define and how we know what family engagement is. So I'm going to pass the mic to them.
Thank you. All right. I've left the table information on the wall, so when you have a break or at lunch, you might want to see what your colleagues have said. But we were commenting that when we've done a similar activity in other places, we kind of guessed what was going to come up, and a lot of it was activity-based, which Sarah has talked about. You folks are well beyond the bake sale. When we came around and listened to the snippets of conversation at your table, we have to acknowledge that your conversations were much deeper and went well beyond what we have seen before, which is saying that you're in a really good place to make this work. So let's read the list. Common themes appeared. Two-way communication came up everywhere. Partnerships, welcoming environment, shared responsibility, multiple opportunities for parents to be involved, empowering parents to advocate, not just volunteer in the schools, but because they're in the schools, to be your advocates for things related to education. And then a new rising awareness of culture, and not more than tolerance of other cultures, but an appreciation for culture. And this was our overachieving table, which we want you to see. They created a logo for this, and Sarah might take it someplace else, which shows that the continuous cycle of communities, families, all around student learning. What I want to say is that underlying all the common themes that we saw today is our ultimate goal, which Sarah's already mentioned. What do all of these things have in common? They allow us to build trust with our families, and that way they can really be our partners as we work together for the betterment of their students. So congratulate yourselves, you're well on your way.
Wow, that is great. This is really exciting. I'm really excited to kind of see the thinking that's happening in this room. I absolutely love it. It's a breath of fresh air. Thank you all. All right, so let's talk about this a little bit more. So one of the things that we really press around all this work is recognizing, and I think you all really kind of get this, is that family engagement is a strategy. It's not a standalone goal. It's a strategy for what we do and how we do what we do. I'm referencing that For Each and Every Child report again, but when we talk about building excellence and equity in our schools, family engagement really strengthens the system, and it strengthens that individual school experience. I know that when we talk about the work that's happening within our priority schools and our focus schools, that, for priority schools, we know that school improvement is paramount and essential to what we do every day and why we do what we do every day. When we really think about how we partner with families in moving that needle, there's such a huge opportunity for that work to unfold, especially in our priority schools. I want to just quickly share with you a story that I had the honor to learn about that's happened in North Chicago. Do we have anybody who's working with North Chicago or is a representative from North Chicago? Okay, I see a hand. You got to raise that hand pretty high, okay? But I wanted to share a little bit of the story that's happening there, specifically around a middle school with Dr. Vicki King. She's doing some really forward thinking in terms of how do we galvanize families so that they truly understand where we need to go collectively and moving that needle. And she came to the school from Texas. So she's not from the area, but she has a passion and a commitment for this work. Working with her partners, working with her families. She's been engaged with them on a series of conversations around where are we at in the school around how our children are doing. And she has in the beginnings of her work, had some very candid conversations with families, which was really hard to hear. She essentially said to them, our children are failing. And it was the first time, actually, that a lot of families had actually realized this or heard this. And it was hard. She said she saw families crying. It was just a really hard conversation to have with them, but she knew she had to have that conversation with them in order for them to realize the level and amount of work and commitment that needed to come forward from them and needed to come forward from her. But she didn't stop there with that conversation that day, because that would have just been completely devastating. She worked with them and she said to them, well, let's talk about where are the opportunities to grow and how we can do this work collectively. And she taught them how to understand what the scores meant for their children. She unpacked that EduSpeak around assessment and data. She had a myriad of conversations with families on a consistent basis to ensure that and support them on how they were supporting their children at home and in the school and beyond. And it wasn't an easy effort, and it's an ongoing effort. And 2 years, I think it's 2 or 3 years after the work that they've done, the school is seeing the needle move around achievement for their children around reading and math. And it's pretty phenomenal work. But recognizing that when we engage families in a collective way, that needle can move, and how important that is, especially for priority schools and for our focus schools. We know that in focus specifically, there's gaps within our subgroups. And so once again, families become that bridge in terms of us really being able to understand, become aware of where those gaps exist and how we can really tackle them. There was a report that was done that really focused on outcomes for children in early ed, and this is the Who is Teaching Our Children report, but it really kind of highlights and acknowledges the work in working with diverse populations and diverse learners is the most challenging work that we encounter in our schools and districts on a daily basis. But how families can really, once again, be that critical bridge in being able to give schools and districts insights around the discrepancies and the contextual challenges that they face around addressing some of these issues. So once again, when we think about family engagement, thinking about this work not just as a tangential area of work, but as an integral part of how we do education. So one of the things that was important for us at the State Board of Education was to ensure that we shared our common vision around what is family engagement. On your tables, you have these table texts that give you the full definition for family engagement, but I also wanted to kind of share with you some of the highlights from that definition. Acknowledging that we know that this work is a shared responsibility, it is deliberate, it is a deliberate process, it moves to empower adults, and we just didn't say families, we just didn't say schools, but we said adults because it's really a joint effort. It's mindful of diversity, and it is responsive, it's fluid, it's flexible, okay? That a huge part of that definition is also ensuring that we're looking at it in a systemic way, that there's no magic bullet. However, that there are three main tenets that guide this work. And one of them is this idea around taking a systemic approach. And I'll reiterate what I just said again, but acknowledging that it's a strategy, and it's not a goal in terms of how we move forward with the work. That it's integrated, that it's in every part of what we do around education and learning. So it's a part of assessment, it's a part of curriculum, it's a part of professional development and beyond, and that most importantly, that it is sustained. That we are making a long-term commitment to the work, and there's support from our leaders, and it's backed with resources and infrastructure support. So where does this happen on the ground in our buildings and in our areas? Well, what's really important for us to recognize is that it happens in 7 key areas and beyond. And I'll say this again. It happens within a professional development. It happens when we think about their conditions for learning, that school culture climate piece. It happens around our work as leaders and building our commonly shared mission vision and thinking about how and where we're going to leverage those resources and time. It happens around assessment, specifically when we think about getting our young people ready for the park assessment. How do we have conversations with our families about that? Or even informal assessments that happen in the classroom. Assessments that our teachers can be cognizant of to help supporting learning not only in the classroom, but beyond at home and supporting learning at home. It happens in instruction, and it happens in curriculum and comprehensive planning. So more specifically, what does it look like? So in districts, an example of that work could look like leveraging resources to maximize opportunities. We know that's a tough deal. We know that can kind of be sticky sometimes. Like, how do we really get Title I folks to talk to Title III folks and then to leverage some resources within our after-school program under Title IV? What does that really look like? But we really encourage you to kind of do some of that dynamic forward thinking with the support from your coaches, with the support from the state, to think about how we can do that in a way that makes sense, but also doesn't give us the audit finding, right? What does that look like in our schools? More specifically, how we're moving the needle around strengthening. You guys mentioned advocacy within, or how we build areas of empowerment and building our family capacity within our parent advisory groups, our BACs, our PACs, our LSCs, etc. Extending learning at home and in the community when we talk about building support for schools at that level as well. Ardella, you said I have this clicker, so I'm going to go ahead and use it and see if it works. It does. Okay. It's not easy. This work is not easy. I love this picture. Don't you love this? Linda likes that picture too. It's not easy. And I think that's an important recognition that we all have to make. It takes time and it's not easy. How many of you can acknowledge that by a show of hands? Absolutely. Yes. Let's get that elephant out in the room right now. It is not easy. Catherine Hoover Dempsey did some research really looking at what are the barriers around engagement for families. And her work was incredible because she really started to unpack and demystify, that question around, why is this so hard? Why can't we do this? Why is it a challenge? We never see families. What does this mean? And so one of the things that she helped us to understand was that parents need to know and to understand that they should be involved. Oftentimes there are barriers in their understanding of their roles in the school that really disconnect them from how they can support their own children. So how do we help them come to a place where they understand that their role is critical to their child from birth and beyond? We know that there are some cultural barriers, there are language barriers, there are socioeconomic barriers, but across the board, how do we really help our parents to understand that they play a critical role in their children's learning, they should be involved? And as a part of that research, really looking at helping to ensure parents feel capable of making that contribution. So we can say or give them that invitation, but once again, they also have to feel like they're capable, that they are an asset, that they are a contributor to the school, to their child's learning, etc. And that too can be a barrier if they're not given that support or guidance around that work. When I started talking about this, I started talking about, as our roles as educators, it can be very isolating for us. And so we need that support, so do our families. And so what does that look like? I'm always reminded of that story when we had our parent advisory meeting, and there's teachers, and there's community leaders, and there's principals at the table, and there's family members, and we all do our introductions. And do you guys know what the parents said as they introduced themselves? Oh, say it. Just a parent. I'm just a parent. It's like, yeah, you're more than that. You are the linchpin around this work. And lastly, but most importantly, how do we help to build that sense of invitation for them, for their involvement in their children's lives? And that can also be a challenge as well, is that simple invitation, because I really think it goes back to that piece around relational trust. So what's the other nugget that comes into play here? It's the barriers, but it's also recognizing that we need to take a dual capacity, dual generational approach to this work. And I keep saying, I said this before, but there are areas of work that we know that we need to do within our school buildings and our districts around family engagement and building our capacity for this work. How many of you actually went to school and took coursework around family engagement I see one awesome hand raising, 2, 3, 4. This is exciting to see. Thank you. Because oftentimes what we hear is that teachers just did not get that credit. Administrators did not get that support. There's not a lot of information out there around how to do this work. I don't know how. And so that's a continuous journey that we have to recognize. And that there's going to be that continual shift around thinking and behavior and perception for how this work unfolds, because that support is far and few between. But also looking at the support that families need as well around the work. So there's support our teachers need, the support we need as school leaders and district leaders and staff, and the support that our families need in 3 key areas. Our families need to know and be supported in supporting their child in learning. Our parents know and need to be supported around supporting themselves around learning. And our families, and you guys said this before, need support around self-advocacy, ensuring that there's a solid base around their contribution and what they can do for themselves. And that kind of gets, we'll admit, that was hard for us as a state to kind of acknowledge that, because then that means that we have to move our needle in terms of recognizing we are not the end-all be-all for this work, that we need to extend partnerships with the Department of Human Services, with the Department of Mental Health, with the Department of Children and Family Services, to ensure that we're really working collaboratively to support our families in meaningful ways. So how do we do it? How do we do it? How does it unfold? What does it look like? I was really excited to kind of learn about the work that some of you did last week around unpacking that how. But one of the things that we had continually come across at the State Board of Ed was that very question. We know this is important. We know what it is to some extent, but how do we do it? What are the pieces that we need? And so as the State Board of Ed, we came together and formed a cross-divisional committee to really tackle that question. And these committee reps came from early ed, they came from EL, they came from assessment, they came from Title I, they came from college and career readiness, to really put all the cards on the table and say, we know these are the requirements for the work in these different areas. These are the things that we're doing in these different areas around family engagement. What are the common pieces around us? What's the story? What's the perception that we're giving schools and districts around how this work should happen? How can we ensure that what we're saying and what we're requiring, we're still getting there, there's some common ground, some common language, some common things around ensuring that work is meaningful. And with the publication of the framework, this really kind of gets to that idea. I kind of skipped forward a little bit. But I'd like for you to reference in your folders that ISBE Family Engagement Framework. It's a black and white document. It's pretty thick. But on the front, it says the ISBE Family Engagement Framework. And if you, thank you for pointing that out. You guys have a couple minutes to do that. So there's a framework that's a pretty thick document, and then we have a cheat sheet. We call it the brief. It's double-sided. But I'd like for us to kind of look at that framework for a moment. And before we go there, one of the things that we felt was really important during this committee work was sharing that common mission and vision. And that's what I shared with you, was around the definition for family engagement. We really had to ensure we had a baseline of where we're coming from. And I'd give that to you, if you haven't done that already within your respective schools and districts, is to build that common vision and mission around family engagement, or how that can be an integral part of that common mission and vision that you already have for your schools and districts. And then from there, we really looked at, given all the resources and requirements and the things that we know that we have to do, what does the research say around what should be done? And so we spent a significant amount of time reviewing, analyzing, synthesizing research on family engagement, giving more weight to more rigorous studies that demonstrated a statistically positive relationship between practices and student outcomes. During the review process, it became apparent that there were some overarching themes or principles in which family engagement could be organized. And so the team determined these 4 core principles were really kind of the linchpins that had significant bodies of research for helping districts and schools to unpack and understand the how. And those 4 core principles are developing a family engagement system, building a welcoming and supportive environment, enhancing communication, and including parents in the decision-making. These really became the foundation for the framework. And I have to give a shout out to you for helping to push this. And I'm pointing to you, and my mind has drawn a complete blank. Thank you, Michelle Carmichael from ISBE Learning Supports. She was one of the supports for my partner in crime, Kelly Rauscher, who was also pivotal and one of the co-authors for the framework. But really pushing us to look at and ensure that we're looking at evidence that signifies what makes most sense around this work. Because in coming forward with that, that really helped us to unpack the how and what makes most sense for schools and districts here in Illinois. With being able to kind of set that foundation around the 4 core principles, we can acknowledge and say that this is the minimum. We know that as schools and districts are working in a systemic way, that we're building that welcoming environment, that we're enhancing communication, that we're including parents in decision-making, we know that there is a solid foundation there for the work. And with that said, in the framework, we have a couple of things there for you. There's a research review. to kind of show you the research that kind of undergirds those 4 core principles. There's also standards that can further drill down and unpack those 4 core principles. And then there's also what we call legislative review, so that you can really look at and see how that by taking a systemic approach or looking at this work in a systemic way, that we're using evidence-based, but also ensuring that we're meeting some of the basic compliance regs that we know we have to meet that cross not only just within one area of legislation, but in multiple areas of legislation. So recognizing that by doing this work in this way, we're able to collectively ensure that we're addressing the things that we know we're supposed to do, right, according to what is outlined in ESSA. What's once again really important about this is that you can note that there's no hierarchy. It's not first step, second step, third step, fourth step. It's really kind of, once again, based upon the contextual needs of your community. What is really coming forward from you? Is it the fact that you need to ensure that there's a common vision, that there's structural support, that there's resources to ensure this ground happens? Or is it around the relational trust? Do we have a committed group of stakeholders to move this work forward? Or is it around ensuring that we're getting the feedback, that we're getting that partnership, that we're inclusive about our work? You determine where that begins. But once again, if we're working along these 4 core areas, at minimum, we have that foundation. So let's look at these more specifically. Tackling the system. Developing family engagement system. This really looks at how we're developing a family engagement system that cultivates and empowers adults jointly to support student growth, and that we're working together to address any barriers to learning to ensure college and career readiness. So when we talk about the work at a systemic level, once again, we're really talking about those pieces that really help to ensure that we have a good baseline and support for moving this work forward. One of the things that comes forward around the research is that we need to ensure that we have educational systems that support and encourage parental involvement. The research continues to show us that when we're working towards a systemic way around this work, that the needle moves. Heather Weiss, who's one of the leading researchers again in this field, notes that when this work is systemic, it's integrated and sustained, that we're able to better ensure that we're targeting this work around our educational goals that's embedded into existing structures and processes, and that it is sustainable. So I like this principle very much so, and I also feel like it very much connects to the work that you've learned around that transitions piece. When we have the supports, when we have the infrastructure, when we have the resources from birth to college, we can also ensure that the transitions that our young people and our families make from birth, then going from early ed programs to K, 1, 2, 3, then moving from middle school to high school, that there's some fluidity in terms of how we're connecting the dots. We know that in early ed, there's a tremendous dip around when those families transition into K, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the school arena. Why is that? Why does that dip exist? It's because we really need to also look at how we think about those transitions those families and children make from those early ed programs to the K-8 school systems. There are a tremendous amount of supports as required in early ed around the role that families play in their lives. How can K-8 systems can pick that ball up or create some common language around helping to ensure that bridge and that transition is not as significant as it typically is for families who really need those supports beyond pre-K and making a transition to K-3 and beyond. And another wonderful report, and I'm gonna ruin the name of that, but it looked at the transitions that high schools, that middle school children make to high school. acknowledging that families play an even more integral part of their child's life in high school. And that seems so ironic, right? How many of you, by show of hands, have high school-aged children in the room? Okay, don't be shy. I mean, it's a reality, right? You all look fabulous. And there's that push, right? There's that push. The kids push you away. Like, they can't stand you. They don't want to be near you, to some extent. And that's natural. That's a natural part of what they have to do as they're finding their space and their sense of self, etc. But it's also a call for attention and support as the parent, and that can be really hard. It's really confusing. But what that report noted was that families play an even more stronger role in their teenage person's life, more so than they do when that child is a toddler, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. So I give that nugget to you to tackle that, right? Okay, very good. So this, for me, is the meat of the work. This is the how. I think this is why you all are here today, to really unpack that. I want you to engage in some meaningful conversations in your table to take about 1 or 2 minutes around a systemic approach, systemic thinking. You have your framework, and in the framework I mentioned before, there's standards. Can anyone shout out to me what page the standards start or begin? I think the first one is the systems, 19. So we can pull, I'll give you some cheat sheets. We can pull our framework open to page 19, and as a table, and also thinking about that transitions piece that you guys did last week, some of you did last week. I want us to connect the dots around our work, our roles within our school. So what does this mean for you? What does it mean to take a systemic approach for you in your work right now? So as a table, maybe we do, let's give ourselves maybe a minute to think about it. And then we'll share and have a conversation, okay? All right, we do have a break, so we're going to kind of share what we were just talking about. She was volunteering.
I was just stating that when we were in Springfield last week, the connection with family involvement, that we need real data. And that's very important. We need to identify that first. It's not just the number of parents anymore that come to an event, but maybe if we identify those data pieces first, then we can build off that.
Oh. That is huge because, I mean, even for us at the State Board of Ed, that is huge because we really need to shift that. We need to shift that being counting. We get stuck in this idea around, I didn't see the family. They didn't come into my building. We didn't, that's not the measure for your work. It's not how many families you saw or how many activities you did. It's how we're impacting outcomes for children. It's how we're moving perceptions, how we're building capacity. So, it's really those data points that get to that. I mean, I would call on some of that perception data, and the 5 essential survey is kind of one of those baselines of data points. I think our panelists are going to talk about that a little bit because I don't want to steal their thunder. But that is phenomenal, absolutely. Any other great souls? Anybody want to be voluntold? Okay, since someone's being voluntold over here. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's move on to the. Let's kind of recap this principle, though. That we're making that we have a commitment to family engagement on both sides. That it's shepherded by leadership. That there's capacity building happening. That we're connecting with our partners beyond the school and district capacities within the community. And that we're building in measures for accountability to ensure that this work is happening and that this work is happening well. So to drill down that even further, really looking at how we support policies and building accountability systems that promote family engagement as an essential element for student success. That we're using strategies that empower and enable educators and families to be confident. I think that's important too, because oftentimes it's that confident piece that really does get in the way on both sides. And how do we also ensure that we're building knowledge and that we're ensuring that our stakeholders are informed, that engagement is linked to learning and healthy development, and that the homeschool partnerships in which families effectively advocate for their children actively support student learning. Sometimes we're spinning our wheels. We think we're doing these activities and we're building relationships with our families, but it's not connected to an outcome. It's not intentional around, why we're having these conversations with our families or why we're having these conversations with our teachers. We've got to ensure that it's connected to a very strategic effort within the work that we're trying to do around moving that needle for outcomes for children. So the second principle, it's called building the welcoming environment, but it's really about building trust. You guys talked a lot about that, and I was really excited the fact that you have looked at that more specifically, because that trust piece is huge. Oftentimes when we think about a welcome environment, we tend to first picture the physical environment. That has an impact too. I think someone shared over here in their buildings that they have security guards everywhere. I know in some schools, parents can't even come into the door. They have to stand behind the gate to pick up their children. And if they want to come in to meet with the teacher or see the school, they have to set an appointment, God willing, that appointment is available for them to have. But that's important too. And also the space piece, because when families can feel that the school is a part of the safe space for them, then that also does help to better create opportunities for them to be able to support their children in learning and be able to see how their children learn in skill building is important as well too. But what's also most important is that trust piece. And I really want to break that down even more, because it's really about this idea around building relational trust. What is relational trust? But it's really around this idea around being able to show respect, to actively reach out to others, that we're responsive to needs and assets, that we show personal regard, that we follow through in our commitments, that we're transparent. And this is hard because I know all the many hats that we juggle, but that we really move to go above and beyond expectations. And I feel like that's really an important piece as well too. Once again, I don't want to steal our panelist thunder because she's going to talk about that, but I think some of the work that we do on the ground around building trust is so essential and so important. So once again, researchers have found that cultivating relational trust is essential to building that welcoming and supportive environment. All right, let's do some drill down. What can this look like in your school or district on the work that you do, maybe in your role within CSI? So, and once again, I will say that looking at how this connects to the work that happened last week, I think that oh gosh, I hope I don't lose this, but I think that the piece that was done more specifically around, I may have to come back to connect with you about that, but let's in our groups talk about what does this work look like for you in your schools and districts. We'll give ourselves a couple minutes to do that. But do we have any brave souls or a brave soul that's willing to kind of share out what some of the highlights from their table?
And what she was saying, Rich at our table, she was discussing that some place in our area where usually K-8 has a lot of parent involvement and all that, but I think we get off in the area where high school had a lot more family engagement and response to intervention, and then K-8 did not have intervention as much, so we were surprised because usually it falls off going into the secondary level, and you have more family engagement in the primary level.
So just to answer this correctly, in this area, family engagement was higher at the high school level than it was in the K-8 level. Is that correct?
You said yes.
Yeah. It's awesome. All right, very good. So that relational trust piece, ensuring that we're engaging in ongoing outreach and that we're responsive. Once again, I feel like this, I found it, but this really does connect to that piece around making those connections to learning at home. Specifically, when we talk about supporting our parents and learning at home, it's that relational trust piece that's really going to help to leverage and ensure that what's being said in the classroom or what's being shared with them gets continued to be up and beyond that. That's a critical piece. Oftentimes, parents may feel like or may not want to be a part of that conversation because they don't trust teachers or school administrators, etc. There is a phenomenal video that I would encourage all of you to see. Because of time, I'm not going to show it. Maybe we can show it in the break. I don't know how we could do that. But this video is powerful. It's from the Flamboyant Foundation, and it talks about how this parent had built a trusting relationship with her teacher, and they worked together around supporting her daughter's success in school. And it's really powerful because one of the things that she noted was the teacher started a conversation with her about something that was positive about her daughter. And that was very important for her to hear because she hadn't heard that often from her daughter. And it really helped her to see her daughter and what her daughter is capable of doing and be able to help her to better support, understand her daughter and her journey, and to also be able to trust that teacher when that teacher said to her that something was wrong. And so how they went through that journey together, it's really powerful. So if you get the chance to see it, definitely check out that video. The next core principle is around enhancing communication. How we can ensure that we're staying in tune with our families. It's that ongoing two-way communication. It's looking at how we address barriers. And most importantly, it's also looking at how we address and build cultural competency around being able to support and engage our families in meaningful ways. The last core principle that I'm going to share with you and talk about is how we can work to be inclusive, how we can include parents in the decision-making process. Once again, that piece around being inclusive is pretty powerful because it goes around to this idea around the collaborative approach, building dual capacity, making those early investments, really working towards equity and access and education, and ensuring that it's an integral part of what we do and how we do school work. And this does not come to us easy. More specifically, when we talk about collaborative approach, what does that mean? When I go back to describing that parent advisory board meeting and having parents come to the table, really thinking about how has that parent been invited? How has that parent been supported? Does that parent feel confident and capable contributor to that conversation to the table? And that can really start basically around how that conversation is facilitated. Is it facilitated in a way in which I am leading this conversation and you are going to chime in when I tell you to chime in? Or is it facilitated in a way that we recognize the assets that we all bring to the table, we acknowledge them, maybe through writing them down, and then we follow through on the things that were shared during that table. So there's some very key techniques. There's some very key pieces around ensuring that we're working on both ends to ensure that we have the skills and the wherewithal to ensure that we're taking that collaborative approach to partner with our families in meaningful ways, and that our families feel confident about how that work unfolds more specifically. I'm also going to reference some of the research that occurs out of Northwestern University called ABCD, Asset-Based Community Development. How many of you, by show of hands, are familiar with that work and research and the resources and tools? There are a couple of you. But that's phenomenal when we talk about doing some work around asset mapping. How many of you, by show of hands, are familiar with asset mapping and asset maps? Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Asset maps can be so groundbreaking in terms of really being able to see and recognize the resources that exist within our families, within our teachers, within ourselves, and also within our communities that we often may not see. So those are the 4 core principles that I just shared with you. A lot more of that work is within your framework that you have before you. Also, when you package, you have the brief, which is a 2-page cheat sheet on why and how this work specifically structured around the principles is important. But I also want to, I want us to think deep. I want us to really be reflective around our work and think about high impact strategies. Looking at what we're currently doing and moving that needle around how we can ensure that what we're doing is really, really meaningful. And I know how many of you, by show of hands, are familiar with the term high impact strategies? Oh, awesome. Gosh, this group is awesome. This is a lovely visual to kind of show you what we're talking about in terms of high impact strategies. So it's not just about bulletin boards, but it's moving the needle once again around collaborative planning and thinking and building collaborative works that are sustainable. But let's drill that down even further. When we talk about high impact strategies, we're looking at how we're building capacity. We're providing trainings to both educators and families. We're leveraging funds. We're creating positions dedicated to family engagement that's integrated into all that we do. We're making student data accessible and meaningful to families. We're using student data that makes sense where we know we need to go. We're linking our efforts to learning, and we're building relational trust and respect. So as we think about our next steps, using that frame of high impact to ensure that we're really taking a meaningful approach to this work is so important. And I give you a few stories about how this work unfolds in a couple areas within our great nation. But for instance, in Pueblo, New Mexico, they were trying to deal with this issue around ensuring that parents were aware and cognizant of how they could help support their child in learning. And so what they did was they created dual forms of communication with their families. So they created informal and structured communication streams that maybe was around a face-to-face connection, was around text, but those communications are really targeted around a very singular idea, a message they want to bring forward. They rethought how they did parent-teacher conferences. They linked those conversations to their after-school family nights, to dinner with teachers. They rethought how they did some of that work and really ensured that it was connected on an ongoing basis to the various activities they had, not just within those parent-teacher conferences, but also looking at their after-school programs, et cetera. So leveraging resources and opportunities. They had community advocates. They extended this work beyond the school building into the community. Oftentimes when families have to come to the school building, the thought of doing that can certainly become a barrier, especially if they had a negative school experience. So being able to make those connections to community are critical. And they had liaisons to help build those peer-to-peer connections with them, to give them the confidence and capacity to be involved. With that in place, they saw the shift. Parent attendance at conferences went from 23% to 90%. Students improved attendance, behavior, and attention to schoolwork. Let's talk about how this work looks in Illinois. And these stories are shared on our website, isbe.net/family engagement. You can hear the webinars that school leaders like yourselves have done and shared around work and family engagement. But in St. Charles, a former school principal, Adam Zabrazik, he increased school-wide reading scores through what he created was a very important partners program. He trained a number of parents and teachers around supporting children in reading specifically and moved the needle in terms of where he wanted to go on their reading scores. Christina Baumgartner, who is the current assistant principal in Alton, Illinois, took a committed effort around looking at family engagement as a way, and good teaching strategies as a way to help jumpstart district-wide growth. So she took those two strategies together, looking at how our partnership with families really drills down to that classroom level and moving the needle around academic gains for her district. And it took her about 5 years, that district is seeing gains on their work. And in a high school district 218, Dr. Ann Kaufman, she recently retired, but they doubled down on their work around family engagement at the high school level. At each of their high schools, they built out a family resource center. They hired a family liaison, and they moved the needle. In that district, I think they had some really serious, they had a number of languages that were spoken in that district. I think they had like 4 or 5, but being able to have that family liaison to address that language barrier, to really help parents realize that going beyond high school was really important for the children, and to see the children's success. She saw her needle move in terms of the graduation success rates in her high school district. So being able to engage families makes the difference. I'm going to pause here, and we're going to talk about resources and dig deep a little bit more after our break. We're going to take a 15-minute break.
I've had some really awesome conversations with folks. I see the wheels turning. This is very exciting. We're going to jump into an activity. Before we do that, I know how many of you had the chance to go out and check out the resource table in the front. Okay, good. I also wanted to share with you a couple more resources that we have here available to you free of charge for schools and districts specifically. We've talked about the framework. The framework was specifically made for schools and districts, so that is a resource to you. I've shared with you the various components within that framework. You have the research review. You have an overview that kind of gives you an idea of how and why that framework was developed, which I think can really help to frame how you can use this. You also have the standards that can help you further drill down. We've seen schools and districts use this in a number of ways. You can access, I'm going to say this again, you can access the framework at isbe.net/family engagement. So how have folks used this framework? Well, I can tell you that it's been used in a number of ways. Specifically, the research review, we've seen it being used in helping to develop a community of practice. I'm really looking at, well, what does this mean? What does this look like? What does the research say? Why we need to go in this direction, and how we can continue in supporting our work on a continual basis through developing kind of a school or district-based community of practice network. We've seen this research review used to help build common language, and also to help us also ensure that we're using evidence-based practices in this work. We've also seen the legislative review being used to think about how we can leverage resources, understand federal and state statutes around family engagement, and of course to meet compliance. We've seen the standards used to help guide school improvement planning. They've been copied and pasted as objectives or goals right into their Rising Star data systems, or right into their school planning documents or efforts or strategic plans, or in Chicago it's called their SWIPs. But we've seen it used there. We've also seen the standards being used to kind of help frame PD opportunities for folks, to assess current family practices, and to also think about how we can jointly develop a plan of action. We also have something in the framework called the matrix, but it brings it all together. It brings together the research, the legislative review, as well as the standards, and also poses questions that schools and districts can ask themselves under certain areas around school improvement planning. But it's also been used to kind of help focus conversations and guide action planning, leverage resources, and most importantly, to better help understand how family engagement is an integral part of learning and development. So now let's take, and then we also have a web page. I'll say it again, isbe.net/family engagement. On that web page, you can find a digital form of that framework, but most importantly, you can also find a number of resources. Your colleagues that I mentioned before who's done this work in Illinois, Christina Baumgartner, I'm drawing a blank here, Dr. Ann Kaufman, Adam Zabrozik, and many of your other colleagues, we've all invited them to do webinars around their journey around family engagement, and those webinars are available and accessible to you. You can hear their stories. There's also resources and tools available for you there that are outside of the work that's happening in Illinois, so that you can kind of get a broader and deeper depth of how this work unfolds and looks within your schools and districts. So there's a lot of great resources there within that website. We post conference material. We have what we call a self-assessment action planning tool. There's webinars, there's guidance, there's templates, and then, like I said before, a number of external resources. So, are we ready to roll up our sleeves and really dig into this? Okay, I see a definite head nod over there. In your folders, you have a one-page document titled Family Engagement Snapshot. If you could pull those out, that would be wonderful. Susie and I and Linda will be walking around the room. But this is our beginning, or this is our middle, or maybe this is our end in terms of Where we're thinking about around our work and being able to develop and strengthen our partnerships with families. What I want us to do is I want us to be reflective about what we're currently doing in our schools and districts around building relationships, linking this to learning, or just in general what we're doing. We can't really say that it's in this bucket or that bucket, but we know that we're doing this. If you can think about the activities, the practices, the policies, the people that you have in your school or district that's linked to family engagement, briefly jot some of that work down here. And this first bucket called Our Current Efforts, okay? Then we're going to move down and we're going to look at what our current priorities are in our schools or districts. And I'm talking about what are those hot topics. Is the hot topic in your school or district right now around attendance? Is your hot topic right now in your school or district around funding? Is it around park? Is it around Common Core? What are the current priorities in your school or district? Then I want you to be able to connect the dots. Given the resources, tools, practices, systems, policies that you have around family engagement, and connecting that to your hot topic, your priority, where are the opportunities to integrate family engagement into that work, okay? Or strengthen that work that you're currently doing. So that's the backside on called Take Action, okay? You can use the standards to help you frame your thinking around that area or the core principles or some other, the other pieces of resources that you have from CSI. But we really want to be able to take those dots and connect them, okay? So we're going to dedicate, how much time do we have, Ardella, before we wind up from lunch? Are we taking this through lunch? Okay, perfect. We're going to take 10 minutes to do some really reflective practice around that. And you can talk with your colleagues. Each of us is going to do this. Some of you are in big groups already. Like Dangola, I think you guys are a big group. If you can do this in partnership with your team, if you have a team or your partner, if you have a partner, or if it's just you, that's fine. But if we, be able to do this in a collaborative way, if we can, and if we can't, knowing that we're going to make the commitment to share this out with our colleagues and make it done. So let's take 10 minutes and do that.
So at our table, we are looking at ways that our school district, which is Rancho City Schools 137, is trying to get our families engaged and involved. And one of the things that our entire community is doing is something that's called Rancho Tomorrow, where we're partnering with our high school district and our village to create ways that those systems are moving more thoughtfully about how does one decision in one area impact the other decisions in another area. So when our village is thinking about businesses and infrastructure to pull in, that question is how is it going to have a positive impact on our school system? One of the things that our school system is doing in particular is something we're talking about doing is opening up community schools and looking at opening our doors to before and after school programming for enrichment or even things like daycare services where instead of kids having to leave school, they can do those services at our schools from 2:30 to 6 o'clock, which is what we've identified as kind of a need for families who work supervision for students during that time. And we'd be partnering with our community, not asking our teachers to take on that role, but partnering with our community and asking parents to come in as volunteers or services that are already established to just move their services into our buildings. And we provide them kind of that structure. They don't have to worry about electricity or upkeep of buildings. They can just really focus on running their programs.
That's huge. That's a lot of. Well, thank you all for your deep thinking around this work. I think the community schools model is really a key leverage point in terms of how we think broadly about this work. Oftentimes, within that community school model context, it's about how does the school recognize that it is a something for the community. In our work, we see that readily, the community school model being kind of that readily available connector around bringing all those pieces together.
I did some work in Rockford, and this was a school that didn't necessarily call itself a community school, but it was doing amazing community school work through the arts. And I have to give a shout out to her Aunt Rundle and the tremendous work that she did in that area around engaging families through the arts and beyond, creating that safe space. And she moved the needle in her school and in other schools in tremendous ways. So thank you for sharing that, Rachel. That's really phenomenal. All right, another brave soul. Yes.
We're Peoria Public Schools, and one of the things that we're focusing on, like all of us, is trying to get the more engagement and involvement. And one of the things that we point to is our parent university, which is, we're trying to change the name, but that means that we have monthly meetings they're not even meetings, they're workshops, where families are able to come out, bring their children, and then learn about 5 different categories. They can learn about what's going on in curriculum in the school district. They can go and learn how to be better parents, do parenting classes. We bring people from the community to talk about resources in the community, making tapes, all those kinds of things. So there's a lot of information that happens at these, what we call parent universities, where they get to come out, have 3 workshops in the evening, and learn about all of these different ideas and resources in the community. We also do what I heard my colleague over say, that we also have nurseries in our schools, so that the parents that need to have daycare services is right there in the school for them. And as much as we might not like to admit it, we sometimes, we have teenagers that are parents, and so they're able to bring their children right there to the school, drop them off, and then go to class. So having that full service community school is very important. We work on that very intentionally. So there are, and then monthly, we have also made it a point to have every school having a PTCO that I know we all work on having, but this year we worked on really actively saying, what is your PTO doing to actively support your parents, and making sure that everything that we do now is in Spanish and English. So just intentionally making it a trusting zone for parents to be able to receive their Sky Alerts in Spanish and English, and just intentionally moving forward in that work. So lots going on with that focus in mind of making parents feel very comfortable within our schools, in our district.
Okay. No, that's important. Thank you. And your name? Your name?
Tanya Jenkins.
Tanya Jenkins, thank you. Tanya Jenkins and Peoria, thank you so much. And that relational piece, the relational trust piece is huge. And you guys, it sounds like you have a myriad of ways that you're attacking that. And doing that in a very intentional way. Oftentimes when we think about we want to get more family engagement, thinking about that within a very specific intentional strategy in mind is really important. Once again, we're not doing the bean common thing, we're shifting the needle around how we want to make an impact for the work in our respective schools and districts. So thank you so much, Tanya, for your share.
That's awesome. I was volunteered too. So I'm from Danville District 118, and so we're doing a lot of the same things that everyone else is doing as well. We do have Parent University, but one of the things we were talking about at our table is that there's one thing that we have in common with our parents, and that common denominator is the children. So that's one of the things that I'm very active about in our district and with our families, is that the student voice. This is not something that we do to anyone, this is something that we do with everyone. So that's one of the things that we need to keep in mind. So one of the very most important things is to help our children to understand what is happening with their own education. So one of the things we talked about is having a Danville District data, dinner, and dessert night with all of our families. And so each building would target a group of children. So if you try to do it with everyone, then it won't work. And it's talking about building capacity and talking about sustainability. So your children are the best PR that you can have. They're the customers. And so if they can understand the data and they're able to sell that to their families and they understand it for themselves, they're actively engaged, and then they get their families engaged, and you have that at the dinner table at your school, breaking down those barriers, and everyone can have a family conversation because you invite the teachers in, and everyone's talking about the data, everybody's understanding, they're setting goals together. Teachers are able to talk with the families about what they can do to help meet these goals. And so everyone will leave with understanding what they're going to be doing And that's at the beginning of the year. At mid-year, you'll do a recheck. At the end of the year, you'll have a celebration because everybody's going to be able to meet their goals. That's how you would do a date, dinner, and dessert. And then what you would do at the end of that is that those individuals involved with that would then become the leaders for the next group of people who come in. So that's how you build your capacity.
Good response. Thank you so much. That's really exciting. Any other brave soul that wanted to share how they're connecting the dots between what they're doing?
Hi, my name is Danielle Taylor. I'm PTO Vice President and also the PAC President. From the ground level, I know it's really important to connect. I work in the schools, so I am saying hello to the parents and seeing how they're doing, checking in, and following up with things that they're worried about, anxiety with children, and able to check with that and provide resources for them to trust me, knowing and caring about their families. And then I'm able to welcome in them the workshops that we provide and different things that will help in other areas to support what we've already shared. So that's bringing them in, that's a connection where they can trust and come along with me to these meetings that will build up knowledge and engagement, so from the ground.
That's huge. That's huge. Thank you so much. As a parent, connecting parents to each other, helping to feel, creating that safe space for them to come into the school and extend that beyond the building. That's huge. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Any other, one more brave soul? Okay, very good. Thank you very much all. Give you also a round of applause. For the work that you're doing and the work that you're thinking about doing. This is really phenomenal. I wanted just to briefly share with you all how you can connect more specifically to the resources on the ISBE webpage, because I know our ISBE webpage is phenomenal. So I just wanted to ensure that you knew how to navigate this page. So if you go to isbe.net, and then you click on the link that's here, that's under the teacher administrator strand that says family engagement, or you can type in isbe.net/family engagement. You'll get to the webpage I've referred to quite often during this presentation. Here you can find the digital version of the framework guide. That's here. You can download it, or you can also look through it piece by piece through each of the tools that's available for you, the research review, the standards, the legislative review, etc. You can also click on the link that says ISBE resources, and these are the resources that we on our committee came together and said, these are the things that we all know that touches family engagement, and we're bringing that together on one page for you. So you have resources from Title I, EL, early childhood, special ed, learning supports, etc. And then at the very top, you can see that there's a link called Archive Webinars and Workshops. I shared with you 3 stories of school leaders that are doing phenomenal work in Illinois. You can find the link to their webinars and their conference material here on this page. We've seen folks use this as PDs to help frame PD opportunities within their respective spaces. But I always think it's important to kind of hear that local story and get that local context for the work. So there's a number of webinars here. There's also just conference material that you can download as well. I know that someone particularly was interested in wanting to hear the story of their superintendent in Alton, and I think their assistant superintendent in Alton. And she actually did co-presented a webinar with us around the framework, specifically around Principle 3, including parents and decision making. So whoever that person was, Christine was there in that particular webinar. And then Dr. Ann Kaufman, in her work, she specifically did run around the high school engagement piece, and then Adam Zabrazik, the title of his webinar is there, the VIP Parent Partnership Learning Program Initiative. That one is there as well too. So I wanted to stop here and thank you all for your time and attention. But most importantly, I also wanted to share with you the one of the key pieces to the work that we're currently doing here in the state. So we have the framework, but how do we bring this to life? How do we create supports for you all in the field? I wanted to just kind of let you know that we do have a series of trainings that you can access for your schools and districts teams around family engagement through the Illinois Association IARSS. Thank you. I'm not going to say that whole acronym. But those trainings are accessible to all of you free of charge through your local ROEs. And so we've broken out the trainings that are available to you, but you can get a training around collaborative approach. There's a training there around building cultural competency. There's a training there around just being able to better understand that framework, as well as being able to think about how do we take those critical action steps together as a team. Those trainings are there and available to you free of charge through IARSS, and you can contact your local ROE to get connected to them. They're low cost, practically free. They're accessible through your ROE, and I just read out loud the different training opportunities that are available for you, but I want to make sure that you know that those are available to you through your local ROE. And in your folders, you have a lovely little, thank you, Linda Sheila, Dr. Linda Sheila and Susie Dees. You have a wonderful little page that provides a one-page descriptor of those trainings specifically. And then you also have another sheet that talks about what foundational services is, because they also provide training in addition to family engagement around science, math, ELA, balance assessment, CIP, etc. So those are accessible to you this year. And I also encourage you to take advantage of that. Okay, I believe it's time. I thank you all once again for your time, your space, your feedback, and we'll continue our journey today in this room around how we could move the needle around partnering with our families in meaningful ways. Thank you so much.